Welcome to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure you subscribe to get notified of new stories and leave a rating. If you enjoy today's story, forward it to a friend. And now, the Tale of Jemima Puddle-Duck. What a funny sight it is to see a brood of duckling with a hen. Listen to the story of Jemima Puddle-Duck, who was annoyed because the farmer's wife would not let her hatch her own eggs. Her sister-in-law, Miss Rebecca Puddle-Duck, was perfectly willing to leave hatching to someone else. "I have not the patience to sit on a nest for 28 days, and no more have you, Jemima. You know you would let them go cold. You know you would." "I wish to hatch my own eggs. I will hatch them all by myself," quacked Jemima Puddle-Duck. She tried to hide her eggs, but they were always found and carried off. Jemima Puddle-Duck became quite desperate. She was determined to make a nest far away from the farm. She set off on a fine spring afternoon along the cart road that leads over the hill. She was wearing a shawl and a poke bonnet. When she reached the top of the hill, she saw a wood in the distance. She thought it looked like a safe and quiet spot. Jemima Puddle-Duck was not much in the habit of flying. She ran downhill a few yards, flapping her shawl, and then she jumped off into the air. She flew beautifully when she has a good start. She skimmed along over the treetops until she saw an open place in the middle of the wood, where the trees and brushwood had been cleared. Jemima landed rather heavily and began to waddle about in search of a convenient dry nesting place. She rather fancied a tree stump amongst some of the tall weeds. But seated upon the stump, she was startled to find an elegantly dressed gentleman reading a newspaper. He had black-tipped ears and sandy-colored whiskers. "Quack," said Jemima Puddle-Duck. The gentleman raised his eyes above his newspaper and looked curiously at Jemima. "Madam, have you lost your way?" he said. He had a long bushy tail which he was sitting upon, as the stump was somewhat damp. Jemima thought he was mighty civil and handsome. She explained that she had not lost her way, but that she was trying to find a convenient, dry nesting place. "Ah, is that so indeed?" said the gentleman with sandy whiskers, looking curiously at Jemima. He folded up his newspaper and put it in his coat-tail pocket. Jemima complained about the superfluous hen. "Indeed, how interesting! I wish I could meet with that fowl. I would teach it to mind its own business. But as to a nest, there is no difficulty. I have a sack full of feathers in my woodshed. No, my dear madam, you will be in nobody's way. You may sit there as long as you like," said the bushy, long-tailed gentleman. He led the way to a very retired, dismal-looking house amongst the weeds. It was built of turf, and there were 2 broken pails, one on top of another, by way of a chimney. "This is my summer residence. You would not find my winter house so convenient," said the hospitable gentleman. There was a tumble-down shed at the back of the house, made of old soap-boxes. The gentleman opened the door and showed Jemima in. The shed was almost quite full of feathers. It was almost suffocating, but it was comfortable and very soft. Jemima Puddle-Duck was rather surprised to find such a vast quantity of feathers, but it was very comfortable, and she made the most of it without any trouble at all. When she came out, the sandy-whiskered gentleman was sitting on a log, reading the newspaper. At least he had it spread out, but he was looking over the top of it. He was so polite that he seemed almost sorry to let Jemima go home for the night. He promised to take great care of her nest until she came back again the next day. He said he loved eggs and ducklings. He should be proud to see a fine nestful in his woodshed. Jemima Puddle-Duck came every afternoon. She laid 9 eggs in the nest. They were green and white and very large. The foxy gentleman admired them immensely. He used to turn them over and count them when Jemima wasn't there. At last Jemima told him that she intended to begin to sit the next day. "And I will bring a bag of corn with me so that I never need to leave the nest until the eggs are hatched. They might catch a cold," said the conscientious Jemima. "Madam, I beg you not to trouble yourself with a bag. I will provide oats. But before you commence to your tedious sitting, I intend to give you a treat. Let us have a dinner party, all to ourselves. May I ask you to bring some herbs from the farm garden to make a savory omelet? Sage and thyme and mint, and 2 onions, and some parsley. I will provide lard for the omelet," said the hospitable gentleman with sandy whiskers. Jemima Puddle-Duck was a simpleton. Not even the mention of sage and onions made her suspicious. She went around the farm garden nibbling off snippets of different sorts of herbs that are used for stuffing roast duck. And she waddled into the kitchen and got 2 onions out of a basket. The collie dog Kemp met her coming out. "What are you doing with those onions? Where do you go every afternoon by yourself, Jemima Puddle-Duck?" Jemima was rather in awe of the collie. She told him the whole story. The collie listened with his wise head on one side. He grinned when she described the polite gentleman with sandy whiskers. He asked several questions about the wood and about the exact position of the house and shed. Then he went out and trotted down to the village. Jemima Puddle-Duck went up the cart road for the last time on a sunny afternoon. She was rather burdened, carrying bunches of herbs and 2 onions in a bag. She flew over the wood and landed opposite the house of the bushy, long-tailed gentleman. He was sitting on a log. He sniffed the air and kept glancing uneasily around the wood. When Jemima landed, he jumped. "Come into the house as soon as you've looked at your eggs. Give me the herbs for the omelet. Be sharp." He was rather abrupt. Jemima Puddle-Duck had never heard him speak like that. She felt surprised and uncomfortable. While she was inside, she heard pattering feet round the back of the shed. Someone with a black nose sniffed at the bottom of the door and then locked it. Jemima became much alarmed. A moment afterwards, there were the most awful noises: barking, baying, growls and howls, squeals and groans. And then nothing more was ever seen of that foxy, whiskered gentleman. Then Kep opened the door of the shed and let out Jemima Puddle-Duck. He had a small bite on his ear, but overall he was fine. Jemima Puddle-Duck was escorted home, where she was permitted to sit on her eggs until they hatched. Thank you for listening to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure you subscribe to follow us for new stories and leave a rating. If you enjoyed today's story, forward it to a friend. If you have a suggestion for a new story, send us an email: magicmonorail@gmail.com. Until next time, good night. Would you like to make a podcast? Spotify has a way to let you make one easily, distribute it everywhere, and even earn money, all in one place, for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit right from your phone or computer, so you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. And video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free. You know, ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I've enjoyed sharing my favorite stories with children around the world. If you've ever thought of starting your own podcast, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started.